Some killers make headlines on the outside, but others earn their name after the cell door slams shut. Inside America's toughest prisons, Canada's isolated correctional centers, and Japan's forgotten detention blocks, these 6 men didn't stop killing. They just changed their targets. Some did it for survival, some for power, and one did it simply because the guards couldn't stop him. These are 6 of the most ruthless inmate killers in prison history, and each one turned a jail sentence into a personal war zone. Before we begin, tell us what country you're watching from in the comments. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, because what you're about to hear, you won't find it on Netflix. Most prison murders come down to 2 things: power or disrespect. But in 2013, inside a high-security federal prison in Colorado, a man named Eli Mercer killed his cellmate for a reason that no guard could have predicted. Eli wasn't a gang member. He didn't carry himself like a predator. On paper, he was doing a quiet 18-year sentence for armed robbery and assault, a man with no prior prison violence and barely a disciplinary write-up in 5 years. But Eli had one rule, one obsession, one thing he refused to tolerate, no matter how much it cost him: noise. Guards later said he was always polite, even helpful, but the moment his environment turned loud, radios, arguments, cellmates talking after lights out, something in him snapped. And when the prison assigned him a new cellmate, a 23-year-old from Ohio named Luis Hartley, the countdown began. Luis wasn't a violent man. He was a petty thief, in on burglary charges and doing time on a parole violation. He liked to hum, to tap rhythms on the metal bunk, to whisper to himself late into the night. On the surface, annoying, but harmless. But to Eli, it was something else, something unbearable. After just 9 days, Eli filed a request to be moved. It was denied. On the 12th day, Luis was found dead, his mouth stuffed with prison-issue socks, face bruised, body folded under the bunk. When officers asked Eli what happened, he said only one thing: "I needed silence." The autopsy showed no sharp force trauma, just manual strangulation and asphyxiation. Eli never fought the charge. He pled guilty to murder in open court. No lawyer, no witnesses, no defense. "He wouldn't shut up," was the only statement he gave. Psychiatrists later debated whether he was autistic, psychotic, or just obsessed with control. But one thing was clear: Eli wasn't done. Because 6 months later, after being transferred to solitary housing with a new cellmate, a man who snored in his sleep, Eli did it again. Same method, same outcome. The guards began calling him the Silence Collector. His file was marked for permanent single-cell confinement, and he now spends 23 hours a day alone, in complete quiet. But here's where it gets more disturbing. A third request for a cellie, filed by Eli himself in 2022, went unnoticed. And when officers finally caught the error and checked the camera footage, it was already too late. A third man. A third silence. And this time, Eli had arranged the body under the bunk in perfect symmetry, even folding the man's blanket into a triangle. It wasn't just compulsion, it was ritual. Most people stop reading once they hear mentally ill. But what happens when obsession turns structured? When a killer doesn't act in rage, but in order? That's where men like Eli slip through the cracks. Because in a system built for chaos, no one's watching the quiet ones until it's already too late. By the time Eli Mercer's name hit internal reports for the 3rd inmate death, something shifted in the way prison staff handled him. Not because they feared violence in the traditional sense. Eli wasn't a man who started fights in the yard or carried a shank in his waistband. He was calm, precise. What disturbed the guards most was how calculated everything became. Forensic teams noted that all 3 bodies were arranged similarly. On their backs, arms placed neatly by their sides, the top sheet folded over them like a hospital bed. There was no blood, no bruises beyond what was necessary to silence them. Eli didn't rage, he corrected. That was the phrase whispered in staff briefings. In 2024, a new warden reviewed Eli's entire psychological file and made a chilling discovery. Eli had never been formally diagnosed with any psychiatric disorder, no schizophrenia, no personality disorder. The most anyone ever wrote was possible obsessive-compulsive traits, and a note about extreme sound sensitivity dating back to childhood. A teacher once wrote, "Eli covers his ears during fire drills and becomes physically violent when classmates whisper during tests." That same report had been buried in a box for 2 decades. When asked during an evaluation why he folded the sheets, Eli said, "So they don't look messy." Not out of respect, not out of guilt, simply order. He explained that silence was more than the absence of sound. "It's the shape of things when nothing interrupts them," he told a prison counselor. "Some people pray, I just remove the noise." The prison system, built to cage violence, had no protocol for what Eli represented, the non-violent murderer, a man who didn't curse or fight, who didn't stab, scream, or threaten, yet left a trail of corpses just the same. What made Eli even harder to control was that he didn't hide what he was doing. He filed cellie requests knowing what the result would be, and when he was denied, he made no effort to resist being placed in a shared space. The pattern repeated. He would wait, endure the noise, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, then act, cleanly, quietly. In one instance, a guard reported seeing Eli hand his cellmate a folded paper bird made from commissary packaging. Hours later, the man was dead. When they searched Eli's cell, they found a line drawn in pencil along the base of the wall, a sound boundary, he later admitted. "He crossed it when he laughed in his sleep," Eli said. The court eventually moved to have him declared criminally insane, but he refused to attend the hearing. "Don't put me with those people," he wrote in a formal complaint. "They're loud." The Colorado Supermax eventually gave Eli what he wanted, a private, soundproofed isolation cell, triple sealed, no roommate, no sound from the outside. Some staff called it surrender, others called it mercy, but one psychologist, Dr. Karen Mahoney, said it best. It wasn't mercy, it was containment. You don't give a spider mercy when you stop it from spinning a web. You just keep it from building more of them. That was the final line in her report before she resigned. And the truth is, she may have been right. Because if there's one thing Eli's story proves, it's this. Not all serial killers scream. Some whisper, some fold blankets. Some simply wait for a moment of quiet and create it, with their hands. Eli Mercer knew how to weaponize words, how to turn a simple sentence into a death sentence for someone else. But not everyone in prison needed a scalpel for a brain. The next killer? He used blunt force like it was gospel. While Eli pulled strings from the shadows, Dominic Steele crushed throats in broad daylight. And what made him even more terrifying was that he wanted everyone to see. Dominic Steele made sure the last thing you ever felt was his. Before prison, Steele had nothing. No name, no gang, no code. Just a rap sheet soaked in assaults, bar fights, and one attempted murder of a police officer that finally got him locked away. But prison didn't tame him. It gave him a stage. While Eli read legal codes, Dominic bench-pressed stolen weights and tested which bones snapped quickest under pressure. His hands were cracked and calloused like asphalt. His voice? Rare. He wasn't a talker. Steele's message was always delivered in bruises and blood. He didn't stab. He crushed. Didn't shank. He strangled. And inside Camden County Correctional, that made him more feared than any blade. The first killing wasn't even meant to be a killing, according to him. An argument over the lunch line. One inmate, new fish, too eager, stepped ahead of Steele, didn't apologize, didn't know better. He got slammed into a brick wall and didn't get back up, died later in the infirmary with a crushed trachea. Guards wrote it off as a scuffle. No charges, just another day. But after that, Dominic got a look in his eye like he'd tasted something addictive. The second time wasn't a scuffle, it was a hunt. Word had gotten out that a cellmate had been caught snitching during drug sweeps. He was trading names to get his phone privileges back. One night, Dominic dragged him into the shower block and beat him until the tiles turned red. No witnesses, no cameras, just echoes. Inmates didn't speak. Guards didn't care. That was the rule. Don't see, don't say. Dominic became a ghost story told in the voice of cracked teeth. Everyone in D Block started counting their words around him. One wrong joke could get you a busted rib. One bad glance could get your head slammed into steel. He liked the fear, wore it like a second uniform. But what really twisted everything was how Dominic learned to plan. He wasn't Eli Mercer with the brains of a chess player, but Steele picked up strategy fast. He noticed guard shifts. He timed blind spots. He knew how long an inmate had to scream before anyone actually came running. And with each kill, he got better. Sharper. The third inmate he murdered was a rival from Gen Pop, an ex-gang enforcer named Rami who thought he could intimidate Dominic. What Rami didn't know was that Steele had stuffed 2 bars of soap into a pillowcase that morning. When they crossed paths in the laundry room, Dominic didn't say a word, just swung over and over. The pillowcase tore open. Teeth flew. One guard said later, "It looked like someone dropped a watermelon on the floor." Rami was declared dead from blunt trauma to the skull. Dominic got 2 weeks in the hole and came out smiling. He started working out harder, not to get strong, he already was, but to terrify. Every set was a warning, every stare a threat. They called him the Warden's Shadow. Not because the staff liked him, God no, but because he enforced order in the way only predators could. Nobody stole from his tier. Nobody snitched. You either followed Dominic's rules or you got erased. But it wasn't just violence anymore. It was performance. He killed to send messages. And soon, people were sending messages through him. Other inmates started slipping him names, slipping him commissary, telling him who needed to be silenced. And just like that, Dominic became what every prison fears, a freelance executioner with nothing to lose. He wasn't loyal to any gang, didn't care about race, turf, or drugs. He just liked the sound a neck made when it cracked. One guard later testified that Dominic once asked him, "You ever press your thumbs in just right and feel the light leave someone's body? It's like watching TV static, but behind their eyes." That quote got buried in the disciplinary hearing, but those who read the report never forgot it. He didn't want parole. He didn't care about getting out. Camden was his jungle, and he was the apex predator. What made him worse was how he studied the weaknesses of his prey. One man was deaf in one ear. Dominic came from that side. Another had a hernia. Dominic kicked it first. His kills weren't wild or messy. They were surgical, even if they looked brutal. And they always happened in places where cameras didn't work or where guards didn't look. Over the years, 6 bodies piled up. Only 2 were officially labeled homicide. The rest? Accidents. Medical complications. Suicide. Everyone knew who did it. No one said his name. The only reason Dominic ever got written up was when he assaulted a guard, a young officer who tried to intervene during a beating. Dominic broke his wrist in 2 places and slammed his head against a locker. Even then, the charges got dropped. No one wanted to prosecute a man who could memorize your kid's name just by hearing your phone call once. He was moved to isolation, but even there, the killings didn't stop. Inmates placed in the adjoining cell, some didn't come back out. Dominic knew how to use fear as a weapon, even through concrete. He convinced one cellmate to hang himself with a bedsheet. Another starved to death after refusing food from anyone but Dominic. When questioned, Dominic just said, "Man had allergies. I helped." And what's even more chilling, he never bragged, never gloated, no tattoos, no trophies. He didn't see himself as a killer. He saw himself as gravity, inevitable, something that happened when rules were broken, when you made noise, when you forgot who the king was. Camden officials eventually moved him to a private mental facility under heavy restraint. But they did it at night. No announcement, no paperwork trail. Because nobody wanted Dominic Steele to remember their name. The only thing more dangerous than a man with nothing to lose is a man who discovers he never needed anything to begin with. Dominic Steele had no family, no lawyer, no visits, no mail. There were no eyes watching his sentence tick down, no one waiting outside the fence. So when the state quietly transferred him to Red Ridge Psychiatric Penitentiary, where they send the inmates nobody wants to manage, he didn't flinch. He didn't ask questions. He didn't even ask why. Because in his mind, he wasn't being caged. He was being upgraded. Red Ridge was different. Fewer guards, fewer cameras, more noise from the mentally broken men echoing through the steel corridors. In some ways, it felt like freedom. The guards were young, underpaid, and too busy dealing with schizophrenic episodes and failed suicide attempts to track one silent killer in a gray jumpsuit. Dominic sized up the place in 2 days. He mapped every creaking hinge, every shadowy corner, every echo delay in the showers. He tested the lunchroom seating, watched who sat alone, who mouthed off, who looked like they were faking madness to survive. Because Dominic didn't believe in insanity. He believed in weakness, and when he found it, he squeezed until it shattered. His first victim at Red Ridge was a man named Curtis Lane, mid-30s, shaking hands, scared eyes. Curtis wasn't dangerous. He was just broken. Said he killed his own brother in a manic episode and had been screaming apologies ever since. Dominic didn't care. All he saw was a man who stuttered when asked his name. And that was enough. Late one night, Dominic waited until Curtis was escorted back from rec therapy. When the hallway guard stopped to unlock the cell, Dominic surged forward from his bunk like a released spring. It was so fast, the other inmates barely processed it. He grabbed Curtis by the throat and slammed his head into the corner of the iron bunk frame, twice. By the time backup arrived, Dominic had stepped back into the corner of his room, breathing slow, hands behind his back like a soldier. The footage showed nothing. Camera blind spot. Curtis died the next morning. Brain bleed. Internal swelling. Staff called it self-harm. Dominic didn't even get moved, because Red Ridge wasn't built to hold men like him. It was built to medicate them, and Dominic knew how to swallow pills without swallowing. He kept his mind sharp, eyes sharper. What came next proved how far gone he really was. Over the next 3 months, Dominic didn't just kill for dominance. He killed to teach. He selected targets that represented ideas. One man bragged about beating his wife. Dominic shattered his jaw with a metal cup during breakfast. Another faked seizures to avoid group therapy. Dominic held him down during a real one, eyes locked on the guard the whole time, until the man stopped moving. And the worst? The young inmate named Jesse, who claimed to have stabbed his girlfriend in a jealous rage, but now wandered the halls giggling like it was all a movie. Dominic cornered him in the laundry room. Nobody saw what happened, nobody heard, but Jesse never left that room. His body was found hours later under a pile of wet linens, eyes wide open, mouth stuffed with torn pieces of bedsheet. The message was clear. Dominic wasn't just eliminating threats, he was passing judgment. He'd become a one-man trial system. Inmates began whispering that he thought he was God's hand. And the eerie part? Dominic never denied it. One nurse claimed she once heard him muttering Bible verses in the corner of the day room. Another said he carved tally marks on the wall beside his bed, one for each lie he erased. But the final act, the one that forced Red Ridge to shut down D-Block for 2 weeks, wasn't about judgment. It was about control. Dominic had grown bored. The fear around him had curdled into routine. He wanted to feel new fear, fresh silence. So he orchestrated a fake suicide pact with a man named Albert Griggs, an elderly schizophrenic inmate who believed pigeons delivered messages from space. Dominic told Albert they were chosen, that they had to return to the signal, that it had to happen together. Guards found Dominic sitting calmly on his bed, arms crossed, humming an old hymn. Albert was hanging from a window grate, but Dominic wasn't finished. The next day, he attacked a psychiatric technician during medication rounds, breaking her arm and gouging at her face with a sharpened toothbrush. He was subdued, finally, with 5 guards and a full tranquilizer dose. But he was smiling the entire time. When asked later why he did it, Dominic only said one thing: "If no one stops you, you're meant to continue." That sentence sealed his fate. He was declared legally insane, though most staff believed otherwise, and shipped to a maximum security isolation pod in complete darkness under full sensory deprivation. No voices, no books, no contact, just meals shoved through a slot and cameras watching 24/7. But even in silence, Dominic Steele became a legend. Young officers refused to rotate near his door. Inmates used his name as a threat, and every once in a while, even with no pen, no paper, a new tally mark would appear on the wall beside his bed, clean, precise, fresh, as if gravity still moved at his will. Dominic never escaped, never wrote a memoir, never talked to reporters. He just stayed in the dark, counting sins only he understood. Not because he wanted out, but because he believed judgment didn't require an audience, just timing, and timing was always his gift. Dominic Steele believed in judgment without a voice, a ghost in the system, an executioner in silence. But not every killer in prison waits for shadows or spiritual signs. Some want an audience, some want chaos. Some kill not because they think they're God, but because they want to destroy anything that reminds them they're not. And the next man? He didn't tally sins on his wall. He carved faces, over and over, the same woman, the same betrayal, until one day, one of his drawings looked back at him. Julian Rowe didn't walk into prison with a plan to kill, but something inside him was already broken when they locked the cell door behind him. He'd been convicted for stabbing a man outside a nightclub, a crime of passion, they said. But the tabloids left out what triggered it. The man he killed was his ex-girlfriend's new fiancé. And the knife Julian used? It was a gift she gave him years earlier, still engraved with the words, "Forever yours, C." That kind of detail doesn't go in the papers. That kind of detail lives in a man's head and rots there, especially when he's trapped in a 6x8 cell with nothing but time, walls, and memories that slice deeper than any blade. In prison, Julian became quiet, not reformed, not remorseful, just quiet. He spent most of his hours drawing on scrap paper, napkins, old Bibles, anything he could find. He didn't draw animals or nature. He didn't draw dreams. He drew her, over and over again. Same eyes, same hair, same smirk. Sometimes smiling, sometimes crying, sometimes with a gash across her cheek. The guards joked about it. His cellmate tried not to stare. But one night, the man across the bunk made the mistake of saying her name, not affectionately, not respectfully, just casually. He said, "You still crying over Caroline?" That was all it took. Julian didn't snap. He prepared. He waited 2 weeks, got transferred to a new cell, befriended the man's closest ally in the block. Then, After a fight was staged during dinner hour, Julian slipped out and found the man on the upper tier, asleep, headphones on, unaware. Julian didn't scream, didn't run. He walked in, closed the door, and pulled a sharpened toothbrush from his waistband. What he did after wasn't rage. It was surgical, focused, obsessed. He didn't just stab. He carved, slow, deep, repeating the same motion until the man's face no longer resembled anything human. When guards burst in, Julian was already sitting on the floor, covered in blood, whispering to himself. Not gibberish. A sentence. Over and over. You don't get to say her name. They sent him to solitary, then to psychiatric, then back to general population. But it didn't stop. Julian wasn't just obsessed with one man anymore. He believed the entire prison was filled with versions of him. People who mocked his pain, disrespected love, corrupted innocence. Every new cellmate was a test. Some survived, some didn't. And every time, the pattern was the same. He'd draw them first, study their faces, their smiles, their scars. He'd draw until the image on the paper blurred with the memory of her. And when it did, that's when he acted. He was methodical, never repeated a tactic. Once it was scalding water. Once it was crushed pills in commissary coffee. Once he waited for the metal workshop and used a clamp. No guards ever caught him red-handed. Only the aftermath. Silent cells, still bodies, and drawings left on the walls in pencil and blood. Eventually, prison psychologists gave up trying to rehabilitate him. They called it a rare mix of erotomania and pathological grief. A man whose identity collapsed the moment he lost the woman he thought was his. But Julian never confirmed or denied any of it. In fact, he barely spoke anymore. Only once during a transfer hearing did he say something strange. When asked why he kept attacking people, he paused and muttered, "If you paint the same face long enough, you start to see it in everyone." That line stuck with one of the officers. Years later, when Julian was finally moved to a maximum security psychiatric wing, that officer told a young recruit, "Watch out for the quiet ones who draw. They don't sketch for fun. They sketch to decide." Julian Rowe may never leave prison. He may never kill again. But the truth is, he already found what he wanted. A place where every face is a canvas, and every name is one step closer to erasing hers. The system thought they'd solve the Julian Rowe problem by isolating him. They placed him in the East Wing of Haleworth Psychiatric Prison, a place reserved for inmates who weren't just dangerous, but inexplicably dangerous. Men whose crimes didn't follow patterns, whose motives couldn't be neatly boxed into rage, revenge, or psychosis. Rowe became Cell 8B. No roommate, no job assignments, no time in the general yard. Just 2 hours of solitary recreation in a fenced hallway once a week, and a strict no-contact protocol with other inmates. But prisons make mistakes, and obsession doesn't die in isolation, it breeds. Over the next 2 years, Rowe didn't attack anyone. Not physically, but his art never stopped. The facility's psychiatrists, trying to build trust, gave him paper and pencils under surveillance. He filled them, hundreds of pages, all faces. Most were hers. But some began to look different. And then the guards noticed something more chilling. Each drawing started to include 2 people, one face and someone behind them, watching, shadowed, featureless. It wasn't random. It was thematic. Each page built on the last like a storyboard. The psychologists called it dissociative hallucination, but the guards had another name for it: warning signs. One of them, a rookie named Harris, grew obsessed himself. He started tracking Rowe's sketches on his breaks, photocopying them, lining them up, trying to make sense of the narrative, and what he saw sent a chill down his spine. The drawings were turning into plans. One sketch showed a man with a scar on his lip, a detail matching an inmate in nearby cell 8D named Marcus Flynn. Another showed a hand with a tattoo, identical to another inmate Rowe had never met in person. It was impossible. And yet somehow Rowe knew. He was selecting them, imagining them, preparing. And when the prison hit a staffing shortage during flu season, Rowe finally got his chance. The schedule shifted. A supervisor pulled Harris off his monitoring detail, and a temp officer, untrained in Rowe's protocols, mistakenly assigned a cleaning duty rotation to 3 inmates, including Marcus Flynn. They were escorted past Rowe's door at 6:47 a.m. And when Flynn shouted something crude at Julian's cell, that was the final spark. The mistake happened just 10 minutes later. Another guard opened Rowe's door for his scheduled hygiene break, unaware that 3 inmates were still in the hallway unsupervised. What followed took 41 seconds. Julian stepped into the hallway without a word, walked directly to Flynn, and produced a sharpened piece of metal, smuggled months ago from the repair unit and hidden inside his mattress frame. He didn't slash, he stabbed 17 times, rapid and low, targeting soft tissue, abdomen, thigh, neck. Flynn dropped in seconds. The other inmates backed off, stunned. But Rowe didn't stop. He knelt beside the body and began drawing in blood, letters, symbols, a shape. By the time backup arrived, Rowe had pressed his palms into Flynn's chest and then onto the wall, leaving 2 perfect red handprints beneath a crude sketch of a woman's face. That was the last image Julian Rowe ever made. He surrendered quietly, was sedated, and placed into 24-hour lockdown. But the aftermath rippled across the prison. Inmate artwork was banned, paper privileges revoked, psychological reviews were halted. Guards who had once joked about the crazy artist now referred to him in whispers. And Harris? He quit 2 weeks later. Told his supervisor, "I kept thinking the drawings were messages to himself, but I was wrong. They were instructions to us." The most disturbing part? When they searched Rowe's cell afterward, they found one final sketch taped under his bed. It wasn't of a woman. It was of the hallway, exact layout, labeled, measured. And standing in the middle of it, a small figure with a scar on his lip. Below the drawing, in perfect cursive, were 6 words. "This is how you disappear completely." Julian Rowe didn't need to kill again, but if he ever does, he won't need a weapon. Just paper, a pencil, and time. While Julian killed from a distance with his mind, the next man never touched his victims at all. He used something far colder than violence, trust, and in a Canadian prison built on routine and civility, that made him the deadliest man in the yard. Because Reagan Morrow didn't need a weapon to kill you. He just needed you to like him. Before prison, Reagan Morrow was a youth pastor, charismatic, clean-cut, the kind of man people trusted on instinct. He spoke softly, dressed neatly, and could recite scripture or sports trivia with the same fluency. But that surface was a costume, stitched from practiced empathy and reptilian charm. In 2015, he was convicted of assaulting 3 teenage boys under his mentorship. The trial was short, the evidence overwhelming. But what unsettled people wasn't the crime. It was Reagan's reaction. No apology, no outrage, just a small, unreadable smile as the verdict was read, almost like he wanted to be sent away. At Huron Correctional Facility in Ontario, Reagan arrived with no baggage, no tattoos, no enemies, no gang ties. He was labeled a non-threat inmate, low risk, kept in a mid-security wing, given library duties within weeks, and that's exactly where he started hunting. Not with fists, but friendship. He brought warmth into a cold place, learned first names, remembered birthdays, prayed with lonely men who hadn't seen sunlight in years. Even guards began to speak of him as a good one. But beneath that kindness was a dark intelligence. Reagan didn't just learn people's stories, he studied them. He mapped their weaknesses like a surgeon preparing for incision. The first man he chose was named Andre Lowe, 28th, serving a 14-year sentence for armed robbery. Andre had a temper, but he also had secrets, one in particular that he confessed during a Bible study Reagan led in the chapel basement. A secret about a botched getaway, a woman who had helped him, a betrayal that led to his arrest. It was a moment of vulnerability, and Reagan never forgot it. 3 weeks later, Andre received an anonymous note in his bunk. It said, "She's pregnant. She kept the money. Ask your cousin." That night, Andre snapped, started a fight with another inmate, was pulled into solitary, and 12 hours later, found hanging from a bedsheet tied to the vent. Suicide, the report said. But a few guards who knew Andre didn't buy it. Not after seeing him upbeat hours before. Not after learning that no cousin had visited in months. And not after hearing Reagan lead a quiet prayer at Andre's memorial, ending with the words, "Some men carry more guilt than they can live with." But there was no evidence, no threat, no fingerprints, just a note, handwritten, unsigned, now missing. So the prison moved on, until it happened again. This time to a man named Kieran Hodge, 32nd, in for drug trafficking, clean record inside, no enemies. But he died choking in the cafeteria after ingesting bleach that had somehow been poured into his water jug. The bleach came from the laundry room where Reagan worked weekends. Again, no proof. Reagan was 40 feet away, folding towels. But Kieran had confided in him just days before. Said he was scared, said he owed money to someone outside, said he didn't know how to fix it. Reagan had simply told him, "The Lord moves men into peace, even when peace costs pain." After that, Kieran avoided him, until the day he didn't show up for lunch, because he never made it past his first sip of water. The official cause? Accidental contamination. Security tightened, cleaning protocols reviewed. But still, no link. Except one, Reagan. He always knew too much, knew too soon. And the common thread between both victims? They had both trusted him with something no one else knew. Something that, in the right hands, could become a death sentence. Word started to spread in whispers. Don't talk to the pastor. Smile but don't share. Even the guards pulled back, stopped joking with him, stopped waving at the chapel doors, because something about Reagan was off. Too quiet, too still, like a cat watching mice it hadn't decided to kill yet. But the warden? He still believed. Called Reagan a positive influence. Promoted him to work in the print room, a job with access to paper, stamps, inmate files. Power disguised as paperwork. And that's when the third death happened. A lifer named Terrence Biggs, stabbed in the hallway by a young inmate, a recruit just 20, who screamed afterward, "He told me he was gonna rape me like the others." Except there was no proof Terrence ever said that. No past record, nothing. But there was a rumor, started days before, in the print room, and the young inmate, he had been seen reading a folded piece of paper on his bunk, the same paper used for prayer bulletins printed by Reagan. Again, no witness, no footage, just aftermath, just blood, and just one man walking calmly into the chapel 5 minutes later, Bible in hand, not a wrinkle on his shirt. That was Reagan Morrow's method. He never broke rules, he used them. Weaponized fear, whispered truths, shifted blame, and left corpses that looked like suicides, mistakes, or righteous rage. He didn't need to kill with hands. He killed with trust, with words, with silence. By the time prison officials moved him to isolated housing, 3 men were dead. And no charges were ever filed because Reagan never said anything wrong. He just listened. And when asked later if he felt guilt, he simply smiled and said, "Guilt is for the guilty." Some killers strike out of impulse. Reagan waited. "And made you do it yourself?" After Reagan was quietly transferred to a different wing, a protective unit known for housing sex offenders, informants, and high-profile inmates, many assumed his reign of terror would end. This block had cameras in the showers, daily cell inspections, and no access to shared workrooms like the laundry or print shop. On paper, it was secure, controlled, contained. But if Huron Correctional Facility had learned anything, it was this: Reagan didn't need space to kill. He needed opportunity. And in this unit, he found more than ever. Because here, inmates were already afraid, already isolated. All it took was the right nudge to turn that fear into violence or despair. His next target was a man named Leo Foster, a former accountant convicted of embezzlement and serving time for defrauding elderly clients. Leo was quiet, fragile, known for wearing glasses taped at the bridge and shaking during inspections. A man who couldn't harm a fly, but had made enemies fast, especially with another inmate, Carl Penny Mathers, a former biker with a long record and no patience for white-collar cowards. Carl had been on edge for weeks. His parole had been denied. His wife had stopped writing. And when he caught Leo reading his mail one morning, even though Leo swore it was a mistake, the tension exploded. But something odd preceded the fight. 2 days earlier, Carl received a small handwritten letter. It was folded twice, tucked under his pillow. It read, "He talks about your daughter in his sleep. Every night, says her name." There was no signature, but Carl saw red. His daughter was only 12, and though he had no proof, no witnesses, and no way to verify it, the seed had been planted. During breakfast that week, Carl stood up and punched Leo hard enough to shatter his glasses and knock 2 teeth out. Leo didn't fight back. He didn't speak. He just curled into himself and shook. Guards rushed in. Carl was restrained. Leo sent to the infirmary. And the letter? Gone. As if it had never existed. When questioned, Reagan said nothing. He hadn't been near Carl's cell, hadn't spoken to him all week. But another inmate, someone who once led AA meetings with Reagan, remembered seeing him chatting with the mail clerk, said he saw Reagan borrowing envelopes and asking about cell numbers. Nothing definitive, nothing actionable, but it lingered. Leo survived the assault but wouldn't leave the infirmary. He began refusing meals, refusing visits. Within a month he was dead, ruled a suicide by starvation. Another non-violent inmate who lost the will to survive in the one place Reagan kept finding ways to weaponize. By now, corrections officers were whispering Reagan's name like a curse. They had no proof, no physical evidence, no witnesses who dared speak. But the pattern was undeniable. People died around him. Trust eroded near him. And somehow, he always stayed clean. He was transferred again, this time to solitary permanent lockdown, a one-man cell with no access to paper, no direct contact with other inmates, and no jobs, programs, or privileges. They thought that would be the end. But Reagan wasn't finished. A week later, a guard named Jeremy Lorne quit without explanation, just walked off the job. When questioned later, he admitted Reagan had spoken to him once during meal delivery, just once. They talked about Jeremy's recent divorce, his debts, his son's illness. Reagan had listened, said something comforting, something about rebuilding after storms. The next day, Jeremy found a small folded paper tucked in his back pocket. His pocket. He still doesn't know how it got there. It said, "Wouldn't your son be better off with your life insurance?" Jeremy couldn't sleep for days. He started drinking, went to a psychiatrist. When he finally quit, he didn't report it. He just left, moved to British Columbia, changed his number. Reagan didn't lay a finger on anyone, but he knew how to push, how to linger, how to infect, even from isolation. Eventually, a journalist picked up on the rumors, a series of inmate deaths, unexplained breakdowns, whispers of a man with no weapons but a trail of corpses in his wake. They tried to interview Reagan. He declined, politely, but sent a single typed note back to the paper. It said, "People don't break when you hurt them. They break when you understand them better than they understand themselves." It was signed, simply RM. To this day, Reagan Morrow has never been charged with a single murder, but 6 people have died, and at least 3 more have collapsed psychologically while under his gaze. He is no longer allowed visitors, not even clergy. His meals are slid through a rotating steel tray. His books are pre-screened, no pens, no paper, no contact. And yet guards still say they feel something when passing his door. A coldness, a stare, a sense of being watched even when the lights are off. Because Reagan's power was never about presence, it was about influence. He didn't stab, he didn't shoot, he didn't strangle, he unraveled from the inside out. Reagan Morrow never needed fists to draw blood. He didn't slam heads or smuggle blades. He whispered, waited, and watched people rip themselves apart from the inside. But not all killers are like him. Some don't wait for the mind to break. They break bones. They dominate the room the second they step in. Because unlike Reagan, who hunted silently through influence, the next man believed in one rule only: pain is power. And in the concrete hell of Block D, where sound didn't travel and help never came fast enough, he turned every day into a battlefield. His name was Dale Carter, and his reign wasn't subtle. It was loud, it was relentless, and it started with a single phrase: "Nobody hurts me and walks away." Dale Carter didn't look like a monster. That was part of the problem. He had a southern drawl that made even guards let their shoulders drop, and a smile that could land him favors from nurses, chaplains, and even parole officers. On paper, he was nothing but a brawler from Alabama doing 12 years for armed robbery and attempted manslaughter. But prison didn't tame Dale, it built him. The moment he entered Angola State Penitentiary, something in him changed. The rusted fences, the sweat-heavy air, the smell of blood on concrete, it fed him. Dale wasn't here to survive. He was here to rule, and in Block D, where the lights flickered and the screams echoed, he made sure everyone learned one thing fast: if Dale Carter was awake, somebody was going to bleed. His first kill was an accident, or so he claimed. A 19-year-old cellmate named Terrence Hill, fresh in for burglary, had tried to block the toilet after Dale's nightly dump. That alone earned a punch, then another, and then another. By the time a CO finally checked the cell during morning count, Terrence's skull was split against the edge of the metal bunk. His blood had dried into the corner where the rats usually gathered. Dale was sent to solitary for 17 days, but no charges were added. There were no cameras in that cell, no witnesses. Just Dale's version, self-defense. When he came out, everyone looked away. Even the Aryan Brotherhood kept their distance. Dale wasn't in a gang. He was a gang. One man with nothing to lose and no fear of punishment. And the worst part? He didn't kill out of impulse. He planned. He calculated. He watched men like a wolf cornering cattle. In the yard, he'd sit alone on a bench, shirt off, eyes squinting against the Louisiana sun. But he wasn't resting. He was choosing. Dale didn't kill because he was angry. He killed because it was how he felt clean. Each victim was a release, a purge, a message. His second kill was sharper, more deliberate. A man named Otis Braxton, a tattooed lifer with a history of beating cellmates, made the mistake of laughing too loud when Dale slipped on a wet floor. 2 days later, Otis was found in the shower with a sharpened toothbrush handle stuck halfway into his neck. The camera footage glitched between 2:07 a.m. and 2:14 a.m., just long enough for Dale to enter, kill, and leave. Everyone knew who did it. Nobody said a word. You didn't speak Dale's name after dark. By the third body, Dale stopped hiding. He killed a man over a missing honey bun, another over a torn bedsheet, and then one just because he didn't like his breathing. That one shook the block. The victim hadn't spoken to Dale, hadn't touched him, hadn't even made eye contact. But Dale said his breathing was wet and nervous. That was enough. The COs found the guy slumped by the rec table, neck snapped, eyes still open. Dale just sat there beside him, humming a country song and tapping his fingers on the metal table like he was playing piano. No remorse, no rush, just peace, he confessed. "I did it," he told the sergeant, "and I'll do it again if you put someone else in my cell who sounds like a pig trying to pray." He went back to solitary. 30 days this time, but Angola didn't transfer him. They didn't move him. They just hoped the killings would slow down. They didn't. Dale developed a ritual. Every Sunday, he would take a full shower, slick back his greasy blonde hair, and lay out his state-issued clothes with eerie precision. If he sharpened something, a pen cap, a plastic fork, a mop handle splinter, it was on a Sunday. If someone died, it was usually Monday morning. And the targets were never random. Dale's victims all had a history: a snitch, a wife-beater, a gang runner who pushed a younger inmate too far. To Dale, it was justice. To everyone else, it was execution. One inmate, terrified he was next, offered Dale his entire commissary account in exchange for protection. Dale smiled, took the peanut butter, and killed him anyway. "I don't want your stuff," he said afterward. "I want your silence." The prison psychiatrist filed 3 separate reports on Dale's behavior. None went beyond internal review. Angola had a reputation to protect. Besides, most of Dale's victims were men the system had already written off. So Dale kept killing. 6 confirmed, maybe more. Nobody knew how he was getting weapons, or if he even needed them. Sometimes he just used his hands, sometimes a piece of string. The guards started drawing straws to see who'd work his tier. Dale wasn't just a prisoner. He was a contagion, fear spreading from cell to cell, guard to guard, like a plague nobody could cure. He was transferred only once, to another wing, not another prison. They hoped isolating him from familiar patterns would reset the behavior. It didn't. Within 48 hours, he'd killed again. This time, it was a man who dared to ask Dale his first name. "Call me Mr. Carter," Dale replied before driving his head into the wall over and over again. Dale's file now has a section marked, "Do not house with any inmate, ever." His cell is monitored 24/7, but even now, guards say they hear him whispering through the vent at night, to himself, to the voices, or maybe to the next man who breathes too loud. Most inmates die behind bars because of time. Dale Carter makes sure some of them die much faster. What made Dale Carter worse than the rest was that he didn't see himself as a killer. He saw himself as a correction, a reset button in a broken place where no one was clean. And in his mind, the state didn't punish him. They used him. They didn't give him death row or ship him to a supermax. They locked him up with the worst men in the South and turned their backs. That was permission. And Dale knew it. By his 5th year at Angola, the walls of his cell had more tally marks than paint. Each mark was a date. Each date was a memory. But not all were kills. Some were warnings. Dale would wait until a man crossed the invisible line and then offer one last chance. "I'll give you 24 hours to fix your soul," he'd say, and the whole tier would go silent. Nobody asked what that meant. Nobody ever lasted the 24th. Even the men who begged, cried, or tried to transfer themselves ended up in bags. And the guards, most of them stopped caring. Some even came to fear Dale less than the gangs, because Dale didn't need numbers. He didn't play politics. He didn't spread contraband, owe debts, or trade favors. He existed in a tier of his own, with only one rule: don't provoke the animal unless you want to see how sharp his teeth have gotten. But Dale wasn't done. One afternoon, during a mandatory cell check, a rookie CO named Brantley joked about Dale's collection of soap carvings. "You planning a Hallmark sale?" he said. The next night, Brantley's patrol post was tagged with red ink. One word: pig. They never proved it was Dale, but they knew. The same red ink was used in one of Dale's sculptures, a small crucifix carved out of commissary soap. 2 days later, Brantley transferred. Dale never said a word, but his smile during roll call was enough. The prison's brass began rotating guards weekly to avoid familiarity, and slowly, an unofficial policy grew: don't look Dale in the eye. Because when you did, he studied you, and if he studied you, he might choose you. His killings inside became like folklore, not just for Angola, but for other prisons across the South. Officers in Parchman, Holman, even Texas units would trade Dale's stories like ghost tales. He once cut a man's throat with a milk lid. He choked a guy using just shoelaces. He strangled a snitch during Bible study and then said, "Amen." No one knew what was true anymore. But they all agreed on one thing: Dale Carter was still alive, and as long as he was breathing, someone near him would eventually stop. But not every victim was random or even ruthless. Dale's final known kill happened in year 7. It wasn't about noise or power or dominance. It was about betrayal, the one thing Dale said he never forgave. A man named Jonah Price had come in for vehicular manslaughter. Soft-spoken, middle-aged, clean record. Everyone assumed he'd find religion or keep to himself. And for a while he did. Jonah and Dale played chess on Tuesdays. They shared instant coffee. Dale even taught him how to sharpen soap without crumbling the corners. For months, it looked like Dale had made peace. Until one morning, Dale found his stash of letters torn, soaked, and stuffed in the toilet. His only possessions, 5 unsent letters addressed to his younger sister, destroyed. The handwriting on the waterlogged paper wasn't his, it was Jonah's. He'd written cruel messages over the original text, mocking Dale's words, calling him a dog in a cage writing to ghosts. The discovery broke something inside Dale that hadn't cracked since he arrived. That night, the lights went out at 11:15. At 11:23, Jonah Price stopped screaming. The guards found him face down in his cell, the bars of the bunk bed twisted around his neck like rope. Dale was already sitting cross-legged, hands folded, eyes shut. When asked why, he said nothing. But the next day, one of the COs noticed a new carving beside Dale's bed, a broken chess piece, a bishop split down the middle. Jonah had betrayed Dale's one fragile tether to humanity, and for that, he died slower than all the rest. After that, Angola moved Dale to permanent isolation. No contact, no cellmate. 1 meal a day through a slot. 2 hours of yard, alone. But even in solitary, Dale found ways to communicate, carving messages into his walls, whispering warnings through vents, humming lullabies that stopped only when the lights shut off. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a presence, a reminder of what happens when the system forgets to monitor the monsters it breeds. Dale Carter killed not for thrill, not for revenge, not even for dominance. He killed for meaning. In a world where most men faded into numbers, Dale made himself unforgettable. His legend isn't told through interviews or documentaries. It spreads through warnings, whispered by inmates who've never seen him, feared by guards who've never walked his tier. But they all know one rule: don't breathe too loud, don't talk too much. And if you ever get transferred to Angola, pray you're not housed near D Block. Dale Carter was Angola's ghost, a myth made flesh, an inmate whose name traveled faster than his footsteps. But myths are silent. They thrive on distance. They kill in the dark. Amari Vega was the opposite: loud, smiling, performing. If Dale was a shadow that slid behind your back, Amari was the scream in your face. A man who didn't just kill inside prison, he thrived in it. Because for Amari, a cage wasn't punishment. It was a stage, and every inmate was just another audience member waiting for the act to begin. Amari Vega was the kind of man who never entered a room quietly. Born in El Paso and raised in juvenile lockup more than a home, he learned early that volume could pass for power, and power in prison is survival. By 18, he had 2 felonies, 4 tattoos, and a smile no one trusted. By 23, he was doing time in Lompoc Federal Correctional Complex for armed robbery and attempted homicide. But Amari didn't act like a man counting the days. He strutted through the yard like it was his personal gym, flashed gold teeth like he still had fans, and laughed loudest at men twice his size. The guards called him a nuisance. The inmates called him TV, because whenever he started trouble, everyone watched. But beneath all that swagger was a sickness no one caught until it was too late, a twisted craving for attention wrapped in violence. And his first known prison kill proved it. It started with a talent show. Once a year, Lompoc held a voluntary performance night to let inmates read poems, sing songs, or do comedy. Amari saw it as a spotlight. He signed up as a stand-up comic. His entire set? Roasting other inmates, mocking their crimes, laughing at their charges. Most laughed nervously. One didn't. His name was Byron Chase, a soft-spoken ex-military convict who hated being called out. During Amari's third punchline, he called Byron Captain Contraband and mimicked his limp. Byron stood up, walked off, and said nothing. 3 nights later, Byron was dead, shanked 11 times with a sharpened toothbrush handle in the shower. The weapon was never found, but a single playing card was placed on Byron's bare chest, the Joker. Amari wasn't seen. But a week later during rec, he walked by 2 COs, looked them dead in the eye and said, "Tough crowd that night." They didn't laugh. No one did. Word spread. Amari didn't kill for survival. He killed for punchlines, for symbolism. His kills were acts, skits, theater soaked in blood. After Byron, Amari's behavior escalated. He began drawing chalk outlines around sleeping inmates, tapping on metal tables during meals and calling it his death beat. One CO even caught him carving smiley faces into the wood of the mess hall benches. But the warden said it wasn't enough for SHU yet. So Amari remained in general population, where the fear only grew. Then came his most infamous killing, the one that even made national news. It involved a cellmate named Marco Vela, a man serving 40 years for trafficking. Marco kept to himself, until he made one mistake. He hid a romantic letter he'd written to a female CO in Amari's mattress, hoping to sneak it out. Amari found it, and he didn't get angry. He got excited. That night, he performed a skit in the common area, pretended to be Marco, read the letter aloud in a high-pitched voice. Inmates howled with laughter. Marco? He stayed in his cell, refused to come out, refused to eat. The next day, Amari entered their shared space smiling. By the end of it, Marco was dead, strangled with his own bedsheet and left hanging with the word "lover boy" written in chalk above his headboard. This time, the warden had no choice. Amari was shipped to ADX Florence, solitary. No cellmates, no stage, no spotlight, just walls. But solitary didn't dim Amari. It focused him. He started sending drawings to guards, comics with dark jokes, a stick figure stabbing another with the caption, "Cell Therapy." He began performing through the vents, mimicking voices from other units, confusing new inmates. Once, he even staged a fake fight by slamming furniture and yelling both sides of the argument. Coes rushed in with shields, found him grinning, no one else there, and then the final act came. A young inmate named Elijah Banks was placed in the unit next to Amari. A tech hacker, quiet, doing time for bank fraud. Amari took interest immediately, began talking through the vents. "What's your crime, whisper boy?" he'd say. "Bet you never bled anyone for real." Elijah didn't answer, but the silence only made it worse. Amari turned to threats, promised pain. One day, he stopped talking. For 48 hours, no sound came from Amari's cell. The guards assumed he was sulking, until they heard Elijah screaming. When they opened Elijah's cell, they found him with deep cuts across his arms, self-inflicted, written in blood on the wall. He never stopped talking. They moved Elijah, but it was too late. A week later, he hanged himself. There was no direct evidence Amari caused it. No fingerprints, no assault, just words. Words through a vent that drove a man to end himself. To this day, Amari Vega is still alive, still in solitary, still smiling in every mugshot. He's never officially been charged with murder, but inmates call him the host, because if you're near him, even through steel, vents, or concrete, you're part of the show. And once you're in it, you better hope you survive until intermission.